Տարիների ընթացքում ձեռք եք բերում սեփականություն, կուտակում եք մեծ գումարներ, իսկ մտածել եք, թե ինչ է լինելու դրանց հետ ապագայում։ Լավագույն որակավորում ունեցող իրավաբան Մարիա Պրիմուշկոն իր բազմամյա հաջողակ փորձով կօգնի ձեզ ժառանգության փոխանցման, կտակ կազմելու եւ ձեր ունեցվածքն ապահով պահելու հարցում։ Estate planning, bankruptcy, personal injury եւ այլ իրավական հարցերով դիմեք MVP Law Group։ Ձեր ընտանիքի ապագան կախված է այսօրվա կայացրած որոշումից։ 818 788 7881
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our show, MVP Law Group, and its host and attorney, Maria Primushko. As you already know, every time we on this show, we discuss very important issues relevant to our community. Remember, the goal of my firm is to provide education. For you, for my viewers, for my clients, if they become one, is to have peace of mind. At least I want you to know what are the possibilities and how you can protect yourself, your family now and in the future. And since we're live today, you can call us at 844-404-0808 to ask your questions, and to the most extent possible, I'll try to answer them. Please call us 844-404-0808. Very easy. So, since I want to protect you and with one more subject to discuss, we're going to talk today about a very interesting yet controversial subject: prenuptial and postnuptial agreements. Yes, we're going to talk about marriage. It's always difficult. And what prompted me is that I have a clients couple as my clients, and they actually come from our community. They come from Armenian community, a very responsible young couple. So, what is prenuptial agreement? It is a written contract signed by a couple before marriage to set out their financial plan for their life together, and in case of a divorce, how they're going to split everything up. Also, this subject is important to me and very dear because my daughter is getting married this year. So it is very nice, and since my daughter is young, she's just 22 years old, and her fiancé is also young. They don't have any assets, they don't have any property yet. So this subject, they don't really need to sign any prenuptial agreement because they have nothing, but yet still they can do that to set how they're gonna acquire property during marriage, if it's gonna be considered separate, if it's going to be considered community, how they're gonna treat their debts. So a lot of things can be set up in that agreement for the future. And yes, this subject is very controversial, especially in our cultures. We think that talking about money, about future possible divorce, possible problems in a marriage, it somehow undermines the love, the trust, and respect to each other. I absolutely disagree with this notion, because if you're responsible, you have to think about the future. Love and affection, and it's very important, of course, for marriage. But consider the following. More than, I think 70%, 60 to 70% of marriages fail, especially in this country. So, and guess what? What is one of the most often subject that causes failure in marriage? Finances. Because people are not taught to talk about money. We do not talk about money with our children. So as a side note, I totally want to advise you, talk about money with your kids. Because when they grow older, they become more responsible. They know what money is, how hard to earn them, and how to spend them. So, what happens most often when a couple decides to get married? There's love, there's excitement, they talk about everything but about their finances. They talk about the future, what they're going to do together, about their plans, how many kids they want to have, that they're going to buy a house, they're going to go on vacation, but they do not discuss how they're going to do it, all of that. And it is often happens that when pretty picture of honeymoon and a beautiful wedding fades away a little bit, and a couple is faced with the real life, they quickly learn to find out that money and finances is imperative part of their lives. They have to talk about almost on a daily basis. And if they're not prepared, a lot of arguments can arise. So the purpose of prenuptial agreement is for couples to talk about finances, talk about management, talk about who is responsible for what, each and every person's opinion about certain spending, how they're going to spend money, how about savings, etc. I know people, I know actually my friends, they get married, and in 2 years, wife realized that husband entering into marriage had huge amount of debt. And they were on the verge of the divorce. So they sought family counseling, bankruptcy had to be filed, a lot of problems, and she didn't know about it. And here's your violation of trust. They entered into the marriage without knowing basic facts about each other. They didn't know who owns what, who owes what. And they brought the whole mixture into the family. It became a mess, and that had to be figured out later on with attorneys, with courts, and with psychologists. All of that could have been avoided, maybe not all of that, but at least some of it could have been avoided if they decided to create a prenuptial agreement, talk about their finances beforehand, open up what they own, what they have, and what their debts are, so there are no surprises in the future, or at least reduce them as much as possible. Because we know, I talk about it on a daily basis with my clients, with you guys, that life throws at you curves you wouldn't imagine. I mean, just today, I injured my foot, so I cannot wear heels. I almost got late to this program because my gait were stuck. And that's nothing dangerous happened, nothing bad happened. So we have to be ready to the most extent possible. Think of it. We're buying a house. We're not expecting it to be to get burned in fire. We're driving our cars. We're not expecting to get in a car accident. We're not expecting to get sick, to die, yet we prepare by buying insurance, homeowners insurance, car insurance, liability insurance, life insurance. And of course, if you're very smart and you do the whole shenanigan, the whole estate planning for the future. So creating a prenuptial agreement, it's similar to this. I want you guys to think about it in easier terms. It is getting ready. It is being prepared. If life happens the way that the couple have to split up, at least they know what's going to happen. At least they know that there could be no surprises, or as few surprises as possible. So every state governs prenuptial agreement differently, and here in California there is a Uniform Prenuptial Agreement Act that governs it, and that tells you how prenuptial agreements can be created, what are necessary terms, and how they have to be done from the beginning to be valid. Because I've seen prenuptial agreements that were presumed by court invalid for the following reason. We're going to discuss it now. So, prenuptial agreement becomes effective upon marriage. But remember, it has to be prepared way before. So one of the requirements of the prenuptial agreement is that it has to be done a little way before the actual marriage. So you cannot sign prenuptial agreement just before you put a signature on the marriage certificate. It will be found to be unconscious and invalid, because both parties have to have time to review the agreement. A perfect scenario if there were several drafts, if both parties are represented by an attorney, or at least one of the parties or both parties sign the specific form waiver of being represented by an attorney, of legal counsel. But still, they have to have at least 7 days. Law says 7 days, but for my clients, I prefer them to have at least 2 weeks to review the agreement, exchange with each other, or attorneys exchange corrections or some revisions that have to be done for it to be valid. So first, it has to be done way before, all right? Then for the prenuptial agreement to be valid, it has to have full disclosure of all assets and of all liabilities that both parties bring into the marriage. That's why I mentioned that, for example, my daughter, younger couples, they may not really need prenuptial agreement because they don't have anything. This is more for people who are getting into the marriage way, a little older, or as you can see nowadays, young generation acquires a lot of assets and makes money very fast. So you either have to, basically you have to have some assets that you bring into the marriage, and you want to make sure that in case marriage doesn't work, you don't walk away empty-handed, or that everything that you earned or acquired before marriage or received by inheritance from your parents will be divided in the process of divorce. So at the end of the agreement, both parties list that they own real estate, financial accounts, personal property such as cars, boats, I don't know, airplanes, whatever there is. Also, we take into consideration, we have to list all the retirement accounts, 401k, any cryptocurrency right now. And also debts. Remember, we were talking about debts. You have to disclose to the other party what do you owe and how we're going to treat it during marriage. Almost anything can be agreed upon in the prenuptial agreement, except for child support and child custody. So courts will not honor prenuptial agreement that govern or try to dictate how kids' rights are affected, because it's considered that child custody and child support, it's not between couple to decide. It is child's right to be with one of the parents or both of the parents equal times, or whatever it's decided by court, and receive certain time of child support. So you cannot say, hey, we're getting married because I want a kid, and if we get divorced, I have full custody of the child. So it will be deemed unconscionable and not effective. So that leads us to the term that the terms of the agreement have to be conscionable. It is pretty vague. So what court actually can find what term to be unconscionable? Something very unfair. So for example, it can go to the spousal support, for example. If, let's say, more powerful, usually it's a guy who has more money, much more money. So let's say we have a housewife, a lady who just graduated high school, had some college, and never worked. And she gets to marry a wealthy guy. And they cannot create prenuptial agreement where he's going to say, oh, in case we get divorced, you get zero spousal support. It most likely will be deemed unconscionable, especially if marriage lasted more than a certain amount of years, usually 5 plus, 10 plus. And there is actually a case law where court didn't allow it to happen because it's just simply not fair. Housewife, usually, you know, in our community, ladies a lot stay at home and provide for the household, to raise the family, to raise children, to support the house. And we will continue in just a second after the commercial.
Տարիների ընթացքում ձեռք եք բերում սեփականություն, կուտակում եք մեծ գումարներ, իսկ մտածել եք, թե ինչ է լինելու դրանց հետ ապագայում։ Լավագույն որակավորում ունեցող իրավաբան Մարիա Պրիմուշկոն իր բազմամյա հաջողակ փորձով կօգնի ձեզ ժառանգության փոխանցման, կտակ կազմելու եւ ձեր ունեցվածքն ապահով պահելու հարցում։ Estate planning, bankruptcy, personal injury եւ այլ իրավական հարցերով դիմեք MVP Law Group։ Ձեր ընտանիքի ապագան կախված է այսօրվա կայացրած որոշումից։ 818 788 7881
Այսուհետ Հորիզոն հեռուստաընկերության հեռարձակումները դիտեք հետևյալ հարթակներում. Moidom TV, eWorld TV, HiNet TV, iBox TV, Amena TV, HD Zona TV։ Ինչպես? Զանգահարեք հետևյալ հեռախոսահամարին եւ պատվիրեք այս ծառայությունը, որն ի դեպ ունի բարձրակարգ սպասարկում, բարձր որակ եւ իհարկե մատչելի գներ։ Այսպիսով, դուք հնարավորություն եք ունենում ձեր նախընտրած ծրագրերը դիտել ձեզ հարմար ժամին։ Պատվիրեք եւ վայելեք ձեր սիրելի հեռուստաալիքները որակյալ եւ հարմար տարբերակով։ Ես գտել եմ իմ սիրելի ալիքը, իսկ դուք
So you remember that usually when I talk about estate planning in the future, for the future, I always say if you do not create your plan yourself, there is a plan designed for you by the state. And by the way, I'm still live. You still can call us 844-404-0808. So if you don't create your prenuptial agreement and if you do not set the terms of how the property is going to be divided in case of a divorce, when actual divorce happens, there is a state law there are court rules, there are statutes that's going to tell how the property is going to be divided. And that goes into, separation of separate property and community property. You know, that community property, any property acquired during marriage. Even though, please, our community, remember, even if the house purchased at the time of the marriage, even if it's on one spouse's name only, and the other spouse signed a quitclaim deed saying, hey, I have nothing to do with this house, in case of a divorce, it will most likely, 99% will be counted as a community property. So please do not have a false understanding of it, because any property acquired during marriage is considered community property, unless this property was purchased with inheritance money, or usually it's inheritance money, nothing else. So remember, there's going to be the plan designed by you by the state. And separate property. If you bring your separate property into the marriage without creating a prenuptial agreement, it will be considered your separate property in case of a divorce. However, if there were some upgrades done to the property, if mortgage was paid off from the joint account, if another spouse contributed to the business that was a separate property, if community, husband and wife both contributed to enhancement of the separate property brought into the marriage, it will be everything's going to be recalculated during the divorce, and part of that separate property will be counted as community. So a lot of money and time is spent, and actually it will require forensic accounting, especially when there are higher net worth estates involved. So highly recommend to prepare either prenuptial agreement before getting into marriage, or as always, you can create another estate planning. There's another estate planning solution. It says you can do separate trusts. For example, you have a lot of property coming into marriage. You can create your separate trust, making sure that you provide for your own family, siblings, parents, children from prior marriage, and for the future for your family. But you set up the terms. You're getting into the marriage knowing almost exactly what's going to happen, and that relieves the burden from you, and you have peace of mind. Okay, let's move on to the next subject. In case you were so in love and you didn't want to think about getting a divorce, you didn't want to think about anything happened to your beautiful relationship, but you've been in, and you haven't created the prenuptial agreement. You've been into marriage for quite some time. And for the past, like, say, 6 months, a year or two, you started noticing that your spouse started exhibiting some kind of behavior that you do not like, that can potentially lead family to a financial disaster, or becomes an abusive relationship, or something, not treating your kids right, doing something, maybe expressing criminal problems with criminal law, or getting into debt, starting gambling, any kind of addiction, and you're worried. What's going to happen to us? What's going to happen to our family if we continue this way? And while we're not at the divorce level yet, but you are, you're setting up an alarm. Something's going on. We have to act, and I have to do something now to protect my family, to protect the future. And it doesn't matter. Usually, I've seen both ways: husbands and wives being alarmed and saying, "Hey, I don't know what's going on with my other half." Usually, it is midlife crisis. But it does happen, and party that is not affected by it has to take action to protect children, finances, assets for the future. And there where post-nuptial agreement can be signed, and so where parties still can talk to each other, understand what is happening. Hopefully, the spouse who exhibits that unwanted behavior understands it and sought treatment or help, either psychological or physical or mental or medical, whatever it is. So we can set up the post-nuptial agreement, where we draw the terms, set up the terms, how property is going to be divided in case of a divorce. If a prenuptial agreement becomes valid upon signing, but actually upon date of marriage, post-nuptial agreement becomes effective when court actually approves it. And that makes it so much more complicated, because there are a lot more rules that go into setting up the post-nuptial agreement. Because we know, as an attorney, I know that the actual judge will look at it and decide if it's valid or not. So, as usual, as any agreement, post-nuptial agreement has to be in writing, and it has to be voluntary. Of course, you cannot drag someone in and have them sign an agreement. There also has to be full understanding of the terms. There has to be an agreement of all the terms, and it has to be also conscionable. It has to be fair. We cannot, the spouse usually cannot get out of the marriage with less than they entered into the marriage, or if, let's say, there are two houses and business. We cannot say that everything goes to wife and how husband goes empty-handed, even if he signed an agreement. That usually will be contested, even though he signed it. Most likely it will be contested because there's a lot of people talking, and especially family supporting one party or another. You know, as usual in case of divorce, it becomes messy. Okay, so it has to be conscionable. So also we have to take a look, there has to be a list of assets. The couple will have to bring to the attorney everything that they own, and they will have to decide what's going to happen with each specific asset. Preferably, it is set the way that it's divided pretty much equally. And here actually in post-nuptial agreement, we can talk about child custody and child support. We can talk about it, judge will, because we know that judge will look at it, and judge will either approve it if it's fair and if child's interests are equally protected, then it will be found most likely valid, and you're gonna spend just less time arguing, less money paying to attorneys if you prepare that postnuptial agreement, and in case of divorce you just agree, yes, that's what we agreed upon, let's just proceed and move on. And of course it has to be notarized, etc. So hopefully you have a better understanding of how your assets can be protected by entering into marriage, and after something, you've been into marriage for quite some time and it's either not working, or you're trying to work on it and actually bring it back to life and setting up terms. And very often happens that when parties are at the table trying to figure out what's going to happen during the divorce, they actually start talking. What happens during marriage? That couples separate, they stop talking to each other, including about money. They only fight. Oh, you owe that, you're not making money, or you know, all arguing, going back and forth. Actually, that's why I don't do family law. That's the most I do concerning the family law. I take it too close to my heart, especially when kids are involved. So people start talking, and that's important, and oftentimes that's the beginning of another wave of their relationship, another circle, and hopefully they'll be able to live happily ever after without the divorce. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. Also, I wanted to mention that, as usual, every month, remember I talked to you about it, that I'm holding seminars, estate planning seminars, either at my office, or if I have too much interest that my office cannot hold people-wise, we go to a different venue. So it's going to happen on this month, on March 24th. You can look at my website, mvplawla.com, mvplawla.com, and follow the prompts and sign up if you're interested. And we're going to discuss about various estate planning techniques. By the way, this prenuptial, postnuptial agreement it just touches the surface. When couples enter into the marriage with a higher net worth, with higher assets, or if more advanced techniques have to be used, and we can talk about it individually. As you remember, I do not charge anything for consultation because I want you to know, I want you to understand what is possible, what's possible for you and your family to have. What's most important? Peace of mind. So thank you for watching me. Hopefully it helped you a bit. You get more understanding about the subject. And you can call my office, 818-788-7881. I'll be happy to talk to you. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Տարիների ընթացքում ձեռք եք բերում սեփականություն, կուտակում եք մեծ գումարներ, իսկ մտածել եք, թե ինչ է լինելու դրանց հետ ապագայում։ Լավագույն որակավորում ունեցող իրավաբան Մարիա Պրիմուշկոն իր բազմամյա հաջողակ փորձով կօգնի ձեզ ժառանգության փոխանցման, կտակ կազմելու եւ ձեր ունեցվածքն ապահով պահելու հարցում։ Estate planning, bankruptcy, personal injury եւ այլ իրավական հարցերով դիմեք MVP Law Group։ Ձեր ընտանիքի ապագան կախված է այսօրվա կայացրած որոշումից։ 818 788 7881
Այսուհետ Հորիզոն հեռուստաընկերության հեռարձակումները դիտեք հետևյալ հարթակներում. Moidom TV, eWorld TV, HiNet TV, iBox TV, Amena TV, HD Zona TV։ Ինչպես? Զանգահարեք հետևյալ հեռախոսահամարին եւ պատվիրեք այս ծառայությունը, որն ի դեպ ունի բարձրակարգ սպասարկում, բարձր որակ եւ իհարկե մատչելի գներ։ Այսպիսով, դուք հնարավորություն եք ունենում ձեր նախընտրած ծրագրերը դիտել ձեզ հարմար ժամին։ Պատվիրեք եւ վայելեք ձեր սիրելի հեռուստաալիքները որակյալ եւ հարմար տարբերակով։ Ես գտել եմ իմ սիրելի ալիքը, իսկ դուք